Catching pan goofies in a contradiction. Musty Weenie Clan edition. Notice how during the Black Liberation Movement, Abos, Wabos, Black Indians, Pretendians, Indigenous, Autochthonous, Black Natives, Wild Indians, Injuns, etc. didn't exist at all. The mythical group had no existence then and don't have one now. Good job, Queen Mother. Assata Shakur, we love you and appreciate you for the work you've done to help fight for our existence and place in this thing we call America. Mossy Warrior Clan. This the same fraudulent pan goofy Sean Inni Haret Kalfani Phillips over here rocking with Deanna Bailey, another grifter over there on Tariq Nasheed's FBA movement. And she the same heifer that was over here trying to defend who? Another agent, Ronald Karinga. You know, Ronald, who unalived Bunchy Carter and John Huggins with his Back to Africa movement, US. You know, the cult leader with a harem of light-skinned women and a Latina woman with an afro wig that tortured and beat black women in his cult. Fred Hampton called that African descent BS out long time ago. He said to Ron Karinga, hey, Huey said, get your guns. The pigs are coming. Same thing. There'll be a lot of Newtons running around. A lot of your kids will be calling themselves Huey P. Newton III. They won't be calling themselves Ooga Booga or Karangatang Karinga or Mamalama Karinga. None of that shit. They won't be calling themselves that. We don't care if niggas wear dashikis, you understand? That's not going to mean anything in the final analysis. But we're saying that you need some tools. We've talked about their leaders like Leroy Jones and Mamalama Karinga and big bald-headed Benzumi. As far as we're concerned, that's what he is. And we think that if he's going to continue wearing dashikis, that he ought to stop wearing pants because he's looking a lot better in mini skirts. That's all a motherfucking man needs in Babylon that ain't got no gun. And that's a mini skirt. And maybe he can trick his way out of something because he's not going to shoot his way out of nothing.
Hey, I ain't fucking with no cops. They don't like us getting involved with none of that political shit.
Look, some of us feel we shouldn't even interact with the white man. I mean, we are African, brother.
That's right.
Mother Africa's the only salvation.
Look, you phony-ass bougie nigga. We ain't in Africa. We in Oakland. In Oakland, we got police brutality. We got the white man interacting his billy club upside the black man's head. That shit don't bother you. Why don't you take your skirt-wearing ass back to Africa, Uncle? What? Now, come on.
I'm gonna keep it a buck. I'm not too broken up about Assata Shakur's passing because A, I find it very ironic. You pick an African name, you flee to a Latino country for asylum, but what the hell did you actually do for us? Assata Shakur was for self, much like a lot of those Black Panthers. That's why they were dismantled.
I know that ain't who I think it is.
Now tonight, I want to talk about how Cuba takes care of Assata. If you don't know who Assata Shakur is, I'll make another video on that. Normally, like I said, I tell y'all go look it up, but no, because I'm so passionate about this, I'll make you another video if you don't know who Assata Shakur is. And there was a dude who made a 10-minute video, and I watched every minute of it, talking about Cuba needs to turn Assata over to the U.S. So I'm going to make my video as to why Cuba does not have to and should not and will not. Assata did a lot for black people. Assata did a lot for black people. What the hell did you actually do for us? Assata Shakur was for self.
You keep talking, man, and you shut the fuck up, huh?
what Mossy Warrior Clan is claiming. Their post basically says during the Black Liberation Movement, there were no Abo Wabo Black Indians. This mythical group had no existence then and don't now. They're using the image of Matulu Shakur, Asada Shakur, Seko Ondinga, and Sundiata Akoli, and Jalil Muntamik, whatever his name is, to imply that 1960s and 80s black radicals were exclusively Pan-African / New African and never identified as indigenous, Black Indian, or autochthonous. The reality, the BLA Panther identity, the Black Panther Party was founded as a Marxist community defense organization. It was heavily influenced by Third World internationalism alliances with Puerto Ricans, Asians, Chicanos, and Native American groups. Matulu Shakur and the Republic of New Africa had an explicit land return platform. The 5-state southeastern region, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, which overlaps directly with historic black indigenous communities, Creek, Freedmen, Gullah, Yamasee descendants, Mardi Gras Indians, etc. Panthers worked with American Indian Movement, AIM, Young Lords, Puerto Ricans, and Brown Berets, Chicanos. The Oakland branch literally provided security for AIM and supported Wounded Knee occupation. So the idea that black radicals never touched indigenous identity is historically false. They may not have used hashtags like Aboriginal and Pretendian, but the alliances and shared roots were openly acknowledged. And also these Negroes hung around Pretendian whites like Sachin Littlefeather and Little Tree and even Iron Eyes Cody. So what is this Negro talking about? Pan-African sabotage and COINTELPRO. I'm right about Ron Karinga. The FBI and LAPD used him and others to sow division between the Panthers and the U.S. organization in L.A. COINTELPRO infiltrated and neutralized radical groups. Many so-called leaders were either compromised, jailed, or turned informants. The shift from the Third World internationalism to strict Pan-African back to Africa rhetoric was a tactic to defaming the land reparations question inside the U.S., where black indigenous claims were the strongest. Why Mossy's post misses the point. He's trying to rewrite history as if black Indians are a new internet invention. In reality, black Indian communities predate the BLA. The Freedmen Treaties, Seminoles, Maroons, Lumbees, Creek Freedmen, etc. The Republic of New Africa's territorial claim was literally built on the fact that black people are indigenous to that land via labor, blood, and treaty, which undermines his narrative. Bottom line, Mossy Warrior Clan is projecting a modern gatekeeping narrative onto 1960s, 1970s history. The BLA and Panthers weren't back to Africa only Pan-Africanists. They were multicultural revolutionaries standing on land that had always been black indigenous, not back to Africa. I'm not imagining things. There's a long documented pattern of black activists in the civil rights and black power era openly talking about their Native American ancestry and identity, even while they were in multiracial coalitions with American Indian Movement, Brown Berets, and Chicano groups. The mainstream histories and the gatekeepers I'm sparring with tends to either erase or downplay this part. Black liberation leaders publicly claiming Native roots. Fannie Lou Hamer, Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, described herself as a black and Indian person. Dick Gregory often talked about his Creek ancestry. Malcolm X in interviews referenced his maternal line having Native blood. My mother was half white, half black, half Indian, a complicated way of saying I'm mixed. Angela Davis has spoken up about her Native ancestry in Alabama. Assata Shakur autobiography referenced indigenous heritage on her mother's side. Even Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, joked about Black and Indian roots before he embraced Pan-Africanism. They were never shy about it. It just wasn't the media's priority to amplify that angle. The Black Panthers and Native alliances. The Black Panther Party had formal alliances with the American Indian Movement, AIM. Panthers provided security at Wounded Knee, and AIM leaders spoke at Panther events. Panthers and the Brown Berets, Chicano youth, ran joint free breakfast programs. There were cross-membership Black people with Creek, Cherokee, Seminole, or Lumbee backgrounds working alongside so-called full-blooded Mongoloid Native Americans and mestizos. The movement was third worldless. It didn't erase local roots. It tried to unite colonized people. The pretendian problem already existed. Just like today, there were white or mestizo people pretending to be native for clout or gigs. Iron Eyes Cody, Italian-American playing the Crying Indian, Sachin Littlefeather, Spanish and white heritage, Forrest Carter, author of Education of the Little Tree, a KKK member, rebranded himself as a Cherokee orphan. These figures were promoted by the mainstream media while Black indigenous voices were suppressed or labeled as mulatto or colored or self-hating Africans. That's why so much of the 1960s and 70s Black Native overlapped and got buried. Because many of Negroes wanted to leave their country and farmhouse where their elders told them that they were American Indian, but they went into these cities wanting to listen to this Hotep, Ashanti Queen, and Nefertiti stuff rather than utilizing their indigenous roots. And these Negroes got hit with multicultural entertainment such as blaxploitation movies. Why it's downplayed now, the state and media had an incentive to frame Black liberation as purely quote-unquote African because the land and treaty claims became explosive once you recognize Black indigenous status. Pan-African cultural nationalism, Ron Karenga's US organization, Kwanzaa, was heavily funded and infiltrated to pull Black youth away from domestic land-based politics and into abstract African identity. This is why you see people like Musty Weenie Clan trying to retroactively pretend Black Indians didn't exist in that era or beyond that. It erases the paper trail. Black activists weren't calling themselves generic African slaves. They knew and said they were indigenous even as they formed alliances with mestizo and Mongoloid-style Native Americans on a reservation. The dirtiest open secrets of the 20th century Black history scholarship, a huge number of the master teachers, civil rights icons, and Pan-African public intellectuals I've named either openly admitted Native ancestry at some point or were known in their home communities as Black Indian families. The African-only framing was a later marketing choice. Publishers, foundations, and TV producers like Alex Haley's Roots, money, and a survival tactic in the Cold War racial politics of the 1960s through the 80s. Martin Luther King Jr., aka Michael King, Coretta Scott King's own family records show that Native, Creek, and Cherokee ties in Alabama. King himself used Negro publicly, but his circle knew of mixed ancestry. James Baldwin spoke in an interview of being part Cherokee through his mother's side. James Meredith, Ole Miss interrogation. Family identified as part Chickasaw, Cherokee, Mississippi freedmen. Carter G. Woodson, in letters and speeches, called himself a Negro of Indian descent. Booker T. Washington, in Up From Slavery, says, his mother had some Indian blood. John Henry Clark told students his father was part Creek and Choctaw, later emphasized Africa for strategic reasons. Chancellor Williams, destruction of the black civilization, in interviews admitted mixed ancestry, included Native, but argued for African unity. Alex Haley publicly said he was Scottish and Cherokee on his father's side, later admitted Kunta Kinte was a complete fictional composite character. Leonard Jeffries said on camera he was Powhatan and did genealogy work with Alex Haley, told students the African backstory was symbolic. Professor James Smalls lectures about Sea Island mound culture and says his elders told him to hush up about that African foolishness. Elijah Muhammad, aka Elijah Poole, family from Sandersonville, Georgia, documented Creek and Cherokee connections. Early NOI members described themselves as Indian before adopting Islam. Louis Farrakhan, Eugene Walcott, born in the Bronx to parents from St. Kitts and Boston with Cherokee blood, has mentioned this in interviews with J. Winter Nightwolf, Mthulu Shakur, and Afeni Shakur, both from Southern Black Indian families, named their son after the Inca leader Tupac Amaru as a global anti-colonial statement. Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, told interviews, "I'm no African, I'm from right here," and referenced Cherokee ancestry on his mother's side. Khalid Muhammad repeated on stage, "Africa is not our home, it's our throne." And he mocked the Kunta Kinte references, talking about, "I ain't Kunta Kinte, but I know my roots," and signaling different lineage and understanding. Why the African branding took over, publishing and TV money in the 1970s flowed to Pan-African stories. Alex Haley's Roots was a media event. Cherokee or Creek stories weren't marketable to then. Cold War and COINTELPRO, Black Indian land claims and treaty issues scared the state far more than symbolic back to Africa rhetoric. Pan-Africanism, cultural nationalism, Kwanzaa, the Shikis, African names, and Egypt gave dislocated black youth an identity, but was also used to steer them away from local indigenous claims. Booker T. Washington, Up from Slavery, Chapter 1. My mother, so far as I know, had some Indian blood. Alex Haley interview in Playboy magazine, 1977. My family is Scottish and Cherokee, and even in his novel Queen. James Smalls lecture, Hidden Black Indians of the South. YouTube explains his Sea Island elders. Farrakhan in 1985 speech, My mother was part Cherokee. Malcolm X autobiography, My mother was a white woman from Grenada, some Indian blood. Heck, even Frederick Douglass said that we're not African and that his own master called him an Indian boy and that on his mother's side there's Indian genealogy. Here's some more evidence of our entertainers and artists from back in the day saying they're Indian. Josephine Baker described herself as a Black Indian, Choctaw, and a Negro in interviews. Born in St. Louis to parents with documented Native ancestry. Dorothy Dandridge, family oral history lists Cherokee ancestry. She mentions it in interviews in 1950. The Nicholas brothers, Fayard and Harold. Philadelphia, family known to be part Native. Fayard Nicholas often said their mother had Cherokee roots. Cab Calloway stated in his autobiography that he was part Native American. Little Richard on camera in the 1980s said, I'm Black and Indian from Macon, Georgia, and I'm the only Indian in the business. Jackson family, Joe, Catherine, Michael Jackson, Janet, Tito, Marlon, Jackie, etc. Their parents' line traced back to Alabama and the Carolinas. In old interviews, Catherine Jackson said she was Blackfoot Indian, and their biographies often listed Choctaw as well on Joe's side with Israel Nero Jackson. Marvin Gaye told Ebony In 1975, his family had Indian ancestry in Kentucky. Stevlin Morris, aka Stevie Wonder, said in a radio interview in 1977, "My people are part Indian from the South." The artist formerly known as Prince, aka Prince Rogers Nelson, Prince himself, in early press kits, Black and Cherokee. His father and mother's side in Minneapolis lines trace back to Creoles in Louisiana. Sly Stone, Sylvester Stewart, in interviews has called his family Black and Indian from Texas. James Brown, in his autobiography, The Godfather of Soul, writes his father was part Indian. Apparently he was Apache or Cherokee, one of those groups, and he had some Chinese in his ancestry as well. Etta James told journalists her mother was part Native American. Mahalia Jackson referred to herself as part Indian in a 1950s Jet profile. Billie Holiday claimed Cherokee ancestry in interviews. Her mother's line traced to Maryland Eastern Shore. Billy D. Williams lists African American and Native American in many profiles. Eartha Kitt, famous for starring in interviews. "I'm from the cotton fields of South Carolina. My mother was Cherokee and Black." James Earl Jones, born in Mississippi, raised in Michigan, says publicly his parents were African Americans and Native Americans, particularly Cherokee. Diana Ross has said her father's people from Alabama had Native blood. And as I stated, families like the Bonga brothers, the fur traders of the Ojibwa, and Ammonia Lewis were actually federally recognized Native communities that identified as Blackfoot, but we also got Blackfoots from the Carolinas that's associated with the Cherokee and Tuscarora. Press agents and labels after the 1960s began standardizing bios as quote-unquote African-American or Negro to fit the civil rights and Pan-African story. Oral histories and interviews where these stars said Indian, it still exists, but were rarely cited by mainstream biographers. The Native identity of Black American communities in the Carolinas, Virginia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and even in Oklahoma was already being suppressed legally through colored and reclassification. Mr. T's own statements. In the 1980s, publicity cycles for Roots, the Next Generations in 1979, he publicly claimed Mandinka ancestry partly because of the influence of Alex Haley's Roots and the trend at the time of linking famous Black Americans to African tribes. However, in multiple interviews outside of Hollywood Machine, he has also emphasized of being American Indian. In one off-cited press Q&A, he said, "My father was an African and my mother was Indian. He frequently wore feathers, Native-themed jewelry, and styled himself as a warrior rooted in both African and Indian traditions." The contradiction, the Mandinka label fits right into the post-Roots Pan-African marketing wave of the 1970s and 80s, where celebrities were encouraged to outright scripting to adopt an African tribal identity. His personal presentation and family lore, though learned on American Indian ancestry, which was common in Chicago's South Side and in Mississippi to Chicago migrant families, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee ties. The takeaway is that the media-friendly identity given onto him in the Roots context echoing Alex Haley's script. American Indian, what he himself acknowledged in other settings closer to his family reality. So the honest answer is Mr. T has claimed both, but the Mandinka angle was Hollywood driven while his Indian heritage references came from his own words and style from his own family. So I asked, did Bill Cosby and Felicia Rashad say they were American Indians? Yes, both Bill Cosby and Felicia Rashad, who played Claire Huxtable and Cliff Huxtable, have acknowledged Native ancestry. Though in the same way as many other mid-20th century black entertainers, sometimes directly, sometimes filtered through PR that emphasize quote-unquote African American. Bill Cosby, in interviews during the 1960s and 70s, Cosby described his family as Negro with Indian blood. His mother's people, Hit family from Virginia, had oral history of Native ancestry, and in Ebony magazine profiles, he often referred to my people being Indian and black. Like many North black families with Southern roots, the Indian reference points to Virginia and the Carolina lineage, Cherokee, Saponi, Tuscarora, or related groups that had been reclassified as colored. Felicia Rashad, Nee Ayers Allen, had spoken about her Choctaw ancestry in multiple settings. In a 1990s interview, she said, "My family is African American and Choctaw Indian. Her maternal family is from Louisiana and Texas regions with large documented Afro-Choctaw and Afro-Creek communities. Her sister Debbie Allen has also referenced the same background when talking about their mother's people." Why this matters. Just like I've noted with stars like Eartha Kitt, James Brown, or the Jacksons, these were public admissions of American Indian identity that were later glossed over in official bios. For Cosby in 1980s Huxtable era PR leaned hard on him as a model African American father. His Indian heritage wasn't highlighted because it didn't fit the narrative. For Rashad, the Choctaw reference sometimes shows up in Native/Black cultural anthologies, but mainstream Hollywood reduces it to, oh, she's just African American. So yes, both Cosby and Rashad said they were American Indian. Cosby's Indian blood on his mother's side, Virginia roots, and Rashad's Choctaw ancestry, Louisiana and Texas roots. The main Cosby Show cast, Bill Cosby, Cliff Huxtable, admitted his family had Indian blood on his mother's side, Virginia Height line. Felicia Rashad, Claire Huxtable, has said in interviews, "My family is African American and Choctaw, Louisiana, Texas background where Afro-Choctaw ancestry is well documented." Sister Debbie Allen has referenced the same roots. Sabrina LaBeouf, Sandra, publicly stated that she is Creole and Native American ancestry. Louisiana Creole lineages often combine African, French, and Choctaw, Attakapas, Chitimacha ancestry. Lusa Bonnet, Denise, biracial, African American father, Ashkenazi Jewish mother. Her father, Alan Bonnet's New Orleans family line has been described as Creole with Native American ancestry, Choctaw, Chattahoochee. In later interviews, she emphasized the Creole Native American side more than the Jewish side. Temptish Belshow, Vanessa, family, originally from Chicago with Mississippi roots. While she never gone deep in interviews, genealogists have suggested a mix of African and possibly Native American, Choctaw, and Chickasaw through Mississippi Freedmen line. Malcolm Jamal Warner, Theo, born in Jersey, but with a family from the Carolinas, he has acknowledged Native ancestry in passing, but without extra details being unspecified. Haitianite Pulla Rudy, family from New Jersey and Virginia with a mother, Denise Pullum, comes from a Virginia-colored Indian line, often tied to the Pamunkey and the Chickahominy heritage. Extended family / spinoffs. Raven Simone Olivia, late seasons, born in Atlanta, family from Georgia. In interviews, she has said, "I'm African American and Native American," though she also sometimes says multiracial. Genealogical work traces her line to Creek, Choctaw in Georgia and Alabama. Debbie Allen appeared on The Cosby Show, star of Different World. Like her sister Felicia Rashad, she has spoken about her Choctaw heritage. Dawn Lewis, A Different World, has said her family from Brooklyn via Florida had Native and African ancestry. Jasmine Guy, A Different World, from Atlanta, has referenced Black, Portuguese, and Native ancestry in her background. Why was this downplayed? NBC and mainstream PR in the 1980s wanted The Cosby Show framed as the model African-American family reference to Native ancestry or even multiracial Creole identity didn't fit the positive Negro role model branding, but the actors themselves in smaller interviews, Black press, or local profiles did talk about it. So yes, bottom line, multiple Cosby Show cast members all have said that they're Indian. It wasn't just Raven Simone going on a rant of self-hate or Sabrina. His Samoa artist was Vanity Denise Matthews claiming to be Indian. Born in Canada, Niagara Falls, to a German Jewish mother and a Black Native father, in several interviews in the early 1980s during her Vanity 6 Prince days, she described herself as part African American, part German, and part American Indian. The Indian reference comes through her father, Leva James Matthews, who had African American and Indigenous Canadian ancestry. Some Canadian press even spotlighted her as Black and Indian beauty before she crossed into U.S. music media, and she was also starring in horror movies at that time as well. So Rick James, James Ambrose Johnson Jr., Buffalo, New York native in Glow, in the autobiography of Rick James, he wrote about being Black with Indian blood. Local Buffalo papers in 1970s and 80s described his family as African American with Tuscarora Iroquoian ancestry, which makes sense because Buffalo sits right next to Tuscarora in the Seneca territories. He also styled himself with braids, beads, and feathers in performances, partly funk theatrics, but also drawing on his claimed Native heritage like Ghetto Live. She had pigtails to her shoulder. She couldn't have been much older. She taught me what I had to know to make a girl not want to go. Morris Day of the Time, born in Minneapolis, Prince, longtime collaborator and leader of the Time. In local interviews, he described his family's background as Black and Indian. Like Prince, his family came out of the Louisiana, Arkansas to Minnesota migration lines, which are heavily tied to Choctaw and Creek ancestry. That's why you'll often see him in fringe jackets, moccasins, inspired boots, or Western Native influence stage wear in the 1980s. It wasn't just cowboy aesthetic. Pattern across Minneapolis/funk era scene. Prince himself said in early bios that he was Black, Italian, and part Cherokee, but we don't really know about the Italian part because they're not biracial. They're both mulatto blacks, possibly a Creole descent. His proteges circle Vanity, Morris Day, Apollonia, Sheila E. often carried similar Black Indian heritage claims. Rick James, though based in Buffalo, was tight with the crew and openly talked about his Indian roots with the Stone City Band. So yes, Vanity, Indian through her father, Canadian Indigenous and Black. Rick James, Black Tuscarora Iroquoian. And Morris Day, Black and Indian, most likely Choctaw Creek. Alexander O'Neill, born in Natchez, Mississippi, grown zero of Afro, Choctaw, and Chickasaw, and Natchez Indian descendants. In local press from the 1980s, he described himself as a Black with the Indian roots from Mississippi. Even his stage presentation, Western jackets, bolo ties, and fringes often drew on that of Southern Black Indian identity. Sherrill Johnson, Minneapolis-based R&B singer, cousin of Peebles. In interviews, She has referred to Creole and Indian ancestry, Louisiana family ties. Her look is in the 80s, braids, beads, buckskin jackets, was marketed as part of that heritage. Terry Lewis of Jimmy Jam and Lewis. Born in Omaha, Nebraska, raised in Minneapolis, his family background is Mississippi, Arkansas regions tied to the Choctaw and Chickasaw Cherokee freedmen communities. He has mentioned in passing being part Indian in interviews in Jet magazine in late 80s. Jimmy Jam. James Harris III from Minneapolis, family originally from the South Alabama. In fan club Q&As during the early fly time years, he said his grandparents always told him we got Indian in us. Like Terry Lewis, his Indian ancestry references are tied to Mississippi and Alabama. Des Dickerson, Prince guitarist, Revolution. Nashville, Tennessee native. Interview in 1980s about being from a black and native family line in Tennessee, most likely Cherokee, Chickasaw ancestry. His trademark look, bandana, feathers, war paint, style face, stripes in early Prince tours, was directly tied to how he saw his heritage. Andre Simon, Andre Anderson, childhood friend of Prince from Minneapolis, family also out of Louisiana, Arkansas, which again ties in the Creek and Choctaw roots. He's spoken less directly than the others, but insiders in the Minneapolis scene often grouped him with Prince and Morris as black Indian kids from the South Side. The pattern, most of the Minneapolis funk R&B scene, Prince, Morris Day, Andre Simone, Vanity, Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis, Sherelle, Alexander O'Neal, had Southern black Indian roots. This wasn't coincidence. Minneapolis was a great migration destination for black families leaving Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Carolinas. Heck, they left over there to Gary, Indiana as well. Those migrants brought their Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Catawba, and Lumbee heritage with them in Minneapolis. They became the backbone of the funk explosion in the 1970s and 80s. Funk and soul giants, Bootsy Collins, wind me up, baby baba. Cincinnati-born, family roots in Kentucky, has said multiple interviews, I'm black and Indian. Kentucky black Indian ancestry is usually tied to Cherokee/Saponi Catawba lines. And he was also one of these people that went on that Pan-African trend with James Brown when they went back over there to Africa doing that Black Holy Reats riot stuff. George Clinton, born in North Carolina, Kannapolis, in the funk lore interviews, he described himself as black with Indian blood, the P-Funk aesthetic, feathers, war paint, shaman hats, pulled up on his heritage. Sly Stone, Sylvester Stewart, Texas-born, later raised in Vallejo, California, has repeatedly described his family as black and native Creek Cherokee ancestry from Texas. Jimi Hendrix famously won for Cherokee on his grandma's side, Nora Bell Moore. Hendrix himself told reporters, I'm Cherokee on my mama's side. He wore a turquoise jewelry fringe and native-inspired gear on stage as part of his identity. Smokey Robinson, born in Detroit, said in interviews, I'm black and part Indian, often specified Cherokee in family background. Marvin Gaye, family from Kentucky and D.C., told Ebony in 1970, we have Indian in our family. Mother's side, Cooper, trace to Virginia, Carolina, black Indian groups. Donny Hathaway, Chicago-born, family roots in Missouri. Relatives have stated that they had native ancestry. The Hathaway identified as black and Indian. Where is the love? Not down there, nigga. Roberta Flack, born in Asheville, NC, has said I am black with some Indian and white family oral tradition equals Cherokee equals Carolina Indian. Peebo Bryson, born in Greenville, South Carolina. In interviews, he said, I am African American and Cherokee ancestry. Greenville Black/Cherokee ties go back to the 18th century. Shaka Khan. Yvette Stevens, Chicago-born family from Mississippi. Khan has said in interviews, we're African American and Indian. Her look, fringes, beadwork often played up that heritage. She even wore a war bonnet on stage at one point. Ray Charles. She give me money when I'm in need. Born in Georgia, said multiple times I got Indian in me. Georgia Records back his family, Black Creek and Black Seminole connections. Comedians and entertainers like Richard Pryor, born in Peoria, Illinois. In interviews, I'm part Indian, matrilineal line in Kentucky, Illinois, Black and Native. His stand-up bits occasionally alluded to it. Nipsey Russell, born in Atlanta and family from Georgia, known in his circles for saying he was black and had Indian heritage. So the pattern is Kentucky, Virginia, Carolinas, Georgia, Mississippi roots and constant overlap of black native lineages, Cherokee and Creek, Lumbee, Catawba, Saponi, Tuscarora. These artists' stage wear often reflect it. Fringe, feathers, beadwork, turquoise braids, and even war bonnets long before Afrocentric dashikis hit the mainstream media. In the 1970s and 1980s, press bios usually cut it down to African American, erasing what they